One of the most offensive movie projects ever pitched has been memory hold for the most part. The year was 2016, and one of the biggest comedy stars on the planet was circling a film that was described as an Alzheimer's comedy.
That's not funny.
Sounds like a laugh riot already, right? Well, let's put the brakes on a little. Let's tap them a bit. Comedy shouldn't have guardrails. There should be a lot of leeway and creative freedom when it comes to a particular comedy. I mean, just think about Springtime for Hitler is a great example.
Would you ever believe in a million years you'd ever love a show called Springtime for Hitler?
But this particular comedy project had a different motive, a different perspective that made it more offensive and more inappropriate, you could say. This one was a comedy about a dementia-addled president, Ronald Reagan, in the White House, suffering from dementia, and of course, hilarity ensued. The comedian in question, none other than Elf. Will Ferrell was attached to star in this particular film, playing Ronald Reagan. Now, totally outrageous, right? But at the time, the media didn't defend the project. The media almost seemed as outraged as the rest of us at times. And of course, Ronald Reagan's grown children were horrified by the concept, got a lot of bad publicity at record speed, and guess what happened? The project collapsed. Will Ferrell said, I was never attached to this. This was not my project. Didn't happen. Didn't make the movie. It's kind of amazing when you look back at 2016, which is not so long ago, to see some humility, to see some decency prevail. I miss that. I miss that time. I wish we can go back to that time, because I think if they had made that project today, it would have went straight into production, and Will Ferrell would have been like, I can't wait for you to see it. I bring all that up because there's another possible movie project that also involves a dementia-addled president. Now, this one is not a comedy, but this one is based on reality. It's the Joe Biden story, Befuddled Biden, the movie. Coming to a theater near you, maybe?
Lights, camera, action, huh, Scoob?
Now, the New York Post is reporting, citing a newsletter from CNN, Fake News Central, that the people behind a new book are pushing this movie. Let's pull back a minute. The book in question is called Original Sin. It is co-authored by Jake Tapper, and it looks at how President Joe Biden's decline, we all know it's true, we all know it happened, we all saw it before our very eyes, how it was covered up by the Democrats and by Biden himself. And this book is the framework for a possible movie. That's what we're all talking about. Now, the fact that Jake Tapper co-wrote this book is a comedy unto itself.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Jake Tapper was responsible for helping cover up Joe Biden's dementia. We've got him on video mocking Laura Trump for saying that Joe Biden has lost a step or two.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
He brought up the imaginary stutter and said, how dare you? How dare you? Are you a doctor? No, you're not. You can't diagnose Joe Biden. That was Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper was also the one attacking some of the very few journalists who were brave enough and bold enough to say, hey, wait a minute, there's something seriously wrong with our commander-in-chief. Those are the Wall Street Journal reporters who broke a story before everyone discussed Biden's decline. Jake Tapper was part of the mob that shushed them into silence. So the fact that Jake Tapper is a part of this book, a part of this possible movie, is downright hysterical. It's just not ha-ha funny.
God grant us the wisdom and the strength to oppose the hypocrisy that is figure, sir.
But let's put that aside, the Jake Tapper component. This movie, were it to be made, would be horribly embarrassing to the Biden family. The Biden family's been part of the Beltway politics for decades. There are still power players within that ecosystem for sure. It would make them look terrible. It also would make the Democratic Party look terrible because there are many, many politicians who were telling us straight to our faces that Joe Biden was sharp as a tack again and again and again. And it wasn't just Corinne Jean-Pierre, the White House spokesperson. It was significant figures in the Democratic Party saying, nothing to see here, move along.
America. And I was in almost every meeting with the president in the hours and days that followed. And the president was in front of and on top of it all. asking questions and requiring that America's military and intelligence community and diplomatic community would figure out and know how many people were dead. How many are Americans? How many hostages? Is the situation stable?
They were lying. They were lying to our faces, and it was a massive lie. Not a, I'm manipulating some data to make my party look good. Not a, I'm going to ignore this or ignore that or ignore a question. These were significant lies that were extremely important to not just the country, but the world. So a movie of this consequence would make them look terrible. But it would also, and if you want to tell the full story, and you really need to tell the full story, would make the legacy media look atrocious.
There's a lot of fake news out there these days.
Now, I've used to call them the mainstream media. I think that was giving them too much credit. And I also like the legacy media moniker because legacy feels like it's an aging, a dinosaur-like institution that's fated for obscurity and retirement, if not extinction. I think all those things apply to the mainstream media at this point, the legacy media. They deserve to be extinct. They've done us wrong time and time again. So how could a movie like this be made that is making fun of the Bidens, that is making fun of the legacy media, and that is damaging completely to the Democratic brand? Well, I think your answer is it can't be made.
Inconceivable.
Now, sometimes news outlets make a whole story based on a little kernel of information. And I'm not saying the kernel of information here is necessarily wrong, but just because someone is pitching a movie or spreading it around La La Land doesn't mean it's going to get made. This one, in its current form, I don't think there's a ghost of a chance of it being made. And that's a shame. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be made. It should. This is the biggest media scandal of the century. For sure. I can't think of anything that comes close. This is a story that needs to be told. The commander-in-chief was not all there, and yet everyone told us he was just fine. Now, there's a political impetus in play here that is separate but needs to be mentioned. The media right now is really covering this story extensively. They're leaking a lot of the excerpts from the Tapper book and some other books coming soon. They're aggressively covering it in the way they should have for several years, but didn't. So why is that? Well, the conventional thinking is that they're trying to get ahead of the story. Cover it now, take the L, expose it for all it's meant to be, and then move on.org. Because when you're talking about the 2026 midterms, and of course the 2028 presidential campaign, then all the people in charge of the Democratic Party can say, listen, we covered it. It was wrong. That's old news. We're looking forward. We have a vision for America for 2028 and beyond. And that's what we want to talk about. So if they just get it out in the open now, expose all the warts, they could move on to a new message.
You're dealing with a devious, diabolical mind.
So I understand why they want to do that from a news perspective, but there's a problem here. Any kind of movie is going to take a long time to get into movie screen theaters nationwide. Any movie based on original sin or any of the stories around the befuddled Biden, well, that's not going to come out in theaters this weekend or next month or even the end of the year. Movies take a lot of time, from planning and casting and getting the budget together, pre-production, the actual production, post-production, marketing. It takes months and months and months and months. So any kind of movie that was based on original sin wouldn't come in theaters until at least the earliest next year. And then you're in the midst of a midterms. And that's a whole new dynamic. So the fact that that's in play means you're not going to see this movie anytime soon. Now, the one thing I think you could see and should see is a full-bodied, no-hold-barred documentary on the subject matter. That could be put into play much, much more quickly with a smaller budget, no casting issues. That would be profound. Get that into theaters and see what the reaction is from everyone, left, right, and center. Now, of course, any studio would avoid that like the plague. No Netflix, no Prime Video, no Hulu. None of the major streaming platforms would get that emotion as well. Just too toxic. So it's going to fall in the hands of maybe like a Daily Wire or The Blaze or some other upstart film outlet to say, hey, we're going to produce this, we're going to put it in theaters and see what happens. And if that were to be the case, if the Daily Wire, say, jumps on that kind of a project, I really hope that even though it's an openly right of center publication and I am a contributor to it, that they treat it in a very apolitical, nonpartisan way. Now, I get the impetus to say, get Andrew Klavan and Matt Walsh and all the great talking heads at The Wire to go into this and expose what happened and to really call out all the guilty players. I understand that. I get that that might be a wonderful documentary, but I'd love to see a more neutral, more balanced documentary, a just the facts presentation that really exposes what happened. Because, hey, news clips are great, viral videos are amazing, stories on the web all play a part. But to see a documentary that lays out the whole narrative from start to finish would be exceptional and would be really a necessary thing for Americans to see from all political points of view. This cannot happen again. So we'll have to wait and see if that kind of a film hits theaters. Fingers crossed. Every American needs to know this story from the beginning to the middle to the end. And Hollywood, in a way, is perfectly suited to tell that story, except for all the reasons I mentioned. It won't. Another reason why they won't is because some of their favorite people were part of the cover-up. Think about George Clooney. He met President Biden up close. According to a new report, President Biden didn't even recognize George Clooney, a fairly recognizable gent, if I may say so.
Don't you know who I am?
And then waited weeks and weeks and weeks before he wrote that infamous op-ed saying, "I'm sorry, Joe, it's time to go." What about Jimmy Kimmel? Jimmy Kimmel was at a fundraiser for President Biden's campaign, saw him up close and personal, I'm sure recognized that the elevator didn't go all the way to the top, and then watched him freeze on stage until President Barack Obama walked over, grabbed old Joe's hand, and led him off the stage. Jimmy Kimmel later said, that didn't happen as you saw it. He was perfectly fine. He was just enjoying the adulation of the crowd. Jimmy Kimmel lied to you and me about that situation, and he's never apologized. He's been a part of the cover-up too, and he's part of the story. And so is Stephen Colbert. He also held a fundraiser for President Biden before he bowed out of the presidential race. Did he see a declined Joe Biden? Did he see the guy that who we were described behind the scenes as sharp as a tack and doing push-ups and being as vital as a man half his age? No, I bet you he saw the same Joe Biden we saw in all those viral video clips, a diminished older man, a sad shell of his old self. And through it all, I just want to quickly mention, which shouldn't be necessary, but I would never, ever, ever pick on an older gentleman who was sick, who has had dementia, who is suffering from a cognitive decline. But the minute that he and his party lie to us directly and say that there's nothing wrong, it's all fair game. Sorry, that's just the way it works.
Don't want to do it. I can beat this.
So we'll have to wait and see for a Joe Biden movie. And if it ever happens, I hope it does. I hope it does hit theaters at some point. But it may be the best advice moving forward to wait, to let the news cycle play out, to let the political machinations play out. Some of the best Vietnam War movies that we've seen over the decades happened a decade after the war ended. Think about Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill.
Private Joker, are you trying to offend me?
The emotions, the raw emotions of the time cooled down, and the artists of that era were able to kind of tell their stories their way, in a profound way, in a powerful way. And maybe this is the kind of cataclysmic story that we need to just wait on. So I'm all for a documentary approach. I'm all for that coming out as soon as possible. I think that matters. But to tell the full story in the grand Hollywood tradition, maybe it's time to wait. Maybe it's time to wait a few years and then bring the story to the public. Because either way, this is made for Hollywood, made for the big screen, an important chapter in our history, and one of the saddest ones as well. It deserves a big screen close-up. Just don't hold your breath right now.
Wasn't it Tom Petty who said the waiting is the hardest part?
Well, hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. I hope to have more of them out in the weeks to come. And of course, do check out HollywoodInToto.com. It is my website. It is now in its 11th year. It has all the news, reviews, and commentary from a right-of-center perspective. We are transparent in our emotions and our feelings for sure. Never want to chase our liberal friends away, but that is the angle of the particular website, and no bones about it. It is a necessary angle as well, because the vast majority of people who cover Hollywood are left of center, and they let it influence their reportage, just the way it goes. I let my right of center leanings reflect my reportage as well, especially on this website. So do check out hollywoodintoto.com. And if you're enjoying the show, give us a like, a subscribe, tell a friend about it. We appreciate it. Now go out there and have the best week possible. Doctor's orders.